Welcome to the MCNet Christian Leadership Institute, a unique approach to equipping the next generation of Christian leaders. CLI is an initiative of the International Ministry Coaching Network and implements a competency-based mentorship for ministerial training. It provides a program for pastors and church leaders to train their leadership teams. This podcast series is designed to equip you in how to use the materials and implement this training within your church or organization.
Well, welcome back. We're on 6.2, and again, Fivefold leadership, and we're in this competency in this module as we've looked at. It's three competencies based all around the Fivefold ministry. Now we're going to pick this up again in module 8.0.
Yeah.
But there we get kind of very much more specific as to our capacity in each one of these. But this is really to apply some of the biblical foundation that we've laid in the previous competencies, and really how does that impact you on your team, in your church, in your organization, but more likely in this context within the church. And so the fivefold gifts, as we saw last time, are really functions, aren't they, Doug? They're not just positions, even though they've kind of morphed into that.
And for us, that's really important to emphasize that, because we're not pushing a job or a position or an authority structure. We're understanding how ministry functions within the body of Christ.
Right.
And leadership is important.
Yeah.
Right? But as a leader, you're going to function in one of these or two of these more than others, and that's important to understand how that's going to influence your leadership.
But I think it's important when we look at structure and we look at functions and versus position, is that we don't necessarily reduce this all to just these being, I think that's what's caused historically problems for the church in the past, when we made these five functions actual positions. So the apostle, so you have some on one side that say, well, the apostle and prophet, that function is no longer necessary because the word came, etc., etc. And so the fivefold function isn't, so that's kind of a reductionist theory, on one side of the continuum in the church, or maybe even successionism, that they aren't,
that the gifts have kind of served their purpose and they're gone and we don't need them anymore.
One of two things happens. One, we either reduce it down to just pastor teachers, and we don't really emphasize the other ones, maybe evangelists, but that's about it. And so we've reduced the fivefold gifts to maybe the twofold gift or the
threefold gift.
And then, or the other side is you have, and I think that's a reaction to the other side of the continuum, where some parts of the body have used these as hierarchical, positions. And so they say, oh no, there's the first apostles, and so they call each other apostle and prophet, and so some of us are uncomfortable with that, and because we're uncomfortable with it, then we say, well, they're no longer valid for today.
Right, and that's an overreaction, right? And we have to, that's why we've determined that at the heart of this is servant leadership, because we're getting rid of titles, we're getting rid of hierarchy, and we're trying to figure out how do people actually function and how do we function as leaders.
And we're going to find out that you can have one of these functions and maybe not necessarily be a leader in the church. And so when you separate the fivefold gifts from necessarily always being in a position of leadership, all of a sudden you open up the ministry of Christ, which we're going to see is very, Jesus functioned in all these, the ministry of Christ within the church, and also then within the community around us. So we have a couple assessments on this one also, and there's two of them that we utilize here, and we do an assessment on you seeing where you fit in your gifting. So it's kind of like a gift test for the fivefold ministry gifts, and we have you do it personally, and then also a third party.
A third party assesses that to kind of, what's the word?
Giving you an objective.
Because sometimes you see yourself differently than maybe you should.
See, and on the other side of the break, we're going to look at what some of the readings again that we have, which is the next chapter in our booklet, and then also what are some learning activities that we can do to help us implement this with our life.
If you are interested in using this training program to develop leaders within your church or organization, click on the link in the description or go to our website, mcnetcli.org/contact. This competency mentorship is being used by both young as well as seasoned leaders. The program is currently available in English, Spanish, and Russian. By registering, you will have access to all our materials through the CLI online platform, providing you all the materials necessary to equip your leaders. Upon completion of the program, each candidate will earn an International MCNet Leadership Certificate. If you would prefer to download the materials of individual competencies, go to icmcanada.org/MCNetCLI.
Okay, well, welcome back, and we continue on with 6.2, which is Fivefold Leadership. And what are the readings that we have for this?
Well, we're in the same booklet.
Same one. Imagine that.
Yeah, well, a book, and I should say that this is a kind of a study that I put together a few years ago that really, though, has been in my heart for probably 25, 30 years to do, right since the 1990s. And then since then, I got in touch with some of Hirsch's stuff. I really value what Alan Hirsch had to say on this topic, as well as some of his other books. You probably see some of those up on the screen.
And certainly serve to kind of stimulate us to think deeper in this area, right?
Exactly.
Which is what we're trying to do as well.
And when it comes to learning activities, of course, we're going to have you do a paper, particularly if you're doing this for credit. And if you aren't, I would suggest you read it and look at the whole idea of reductionism versus hierarchicalism, and how this has affected historically. And we go in the book, we'll go into details of how historically this has impacted the body of Christ. Negatively, I would suggest.
Yeah, and to kind of assess that and begin to see how do you kind of have you contributed to this, or are you trying to help restore the full function of ministry, right?
And the whole point of this competency really is to see how you blend together these fivefold ministries on the same team. And one of the assessments that's part of this is also the team unity assessment, we call it. And here what we've done is, as we said on the other side of the break, you're assessing yourself where you're at in terms of your gifting. Are you pastoral, or are you leaning more towards evangelistic, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
But then we also have an assessment where you're then assessing your view of the other gifts. Now, we don't say the other gifts. We just list them all, and you do answer questions.
Yeah. Because sometimes, as a teacher, we might not really value the evangelists because they're way too shallow, aren't they?
Well, they have the same message all the time.
I know. But
deep. Hey, we go deep. We go so deep we can confuse anybody.
I tell you. But then the evangelists could come back at us and say, well, do you have any concern for the world at all?
Exactly.
Because you're just kind of locked into what you do. Right?
And then most people don't like the prophetic types because they always want to change stuff.
Oh, yeah.
They're always out there.
They get on our nerves, don't they?
Yeah, exactly.
A little bit.
And so it's easy to sideline them, reduce them, and make it all about the pastor teachers.
Yeah.
And that's our point, isn't it? Is that if you reduce it from the fivefold, you don't have a balanced ministry.
That's right.
So the question in your ministry, do you have a balance in this? And that's what these assessments and these learning activities will help you determine and evaluate.
That's right. And so our hope is, as we understand this better, that we'll have a broader view of ministry and how it really happens.
And have an appreciation,
Yeah.
on the same team of people that have these other gifts.
Yeah. And to promote those other gifts in people, because that's the leadership part of it, right?
If we're going to have the ministry of Christ living through our churches and then in our communities, I'm just convinced we need to have a balance in the fivefold ministry gifting.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's kind of what this competency is about as we dig a little deeper. And next time we have one more competency in this module, and that's 6.3. And there we're looking again at the fivefold leadership, but also looking specifically at ministry. How do we do ministry through the grid or through the lens of the fivefold ministry?
To learn more about this MCNet Leadership Training Program and how you can implement it with your leaders, download the free orientation guide at MCNetCLI.org. In order to register in the program, go to mcnetcli.org/contact, or to purchase and download the CLI materials, go to icmcanada.org/MCNetCLI.